Okay, so this is a video that's going to talk about pornography, hardcore pornography in the United Kingdom. So maybe I ought to start off with a bit of a warning that if you are in a sensitive context in the workplace, surrounded by sensitive relatives or children or what have you, you might be best to watch this video later on, because I will be talking about sex acts and describing some of them. That's a necessity given the nature of this video. So maybe put on a video of some kittens playing on a shag pile carpet, some kind of crap like that. Watch this one later. Why am I making this video? One is as a response to Sargon of Akkad, who made a video talking about these two issues that effectively are related but different regarding pornography in the United Kingdom. And I want to correct some of the things that he said, because but some of them are factually, a couple of things are factually wrong. One of them is really kind of a bit of a misportrayal. I also want to embellish on a couple of things that he said. But on top of that, these are two current issues, and so are very worthy of discussion, I think. One of them I mentioned in a video a year or so ago, so it's kind of adding to that. So let me kick off with this. So really we're talking about two separate things, but the key one, the driving force of all of this, is the Digital Economy Act 2017, which has a section to pornography all of its own. And in an attempt to protect the children, what they're effectively doing is, if you want to access pornographic material through a United Kingdom, a UK ISP, then the website will be required to provide some kind of age verification. Now, we'll get into that in more depth in a minute, but I think you need to understand some of the players involved and the relationships between those players. Of course, the UK government has formed the legislation, and so they are the driving force for this, really. But then you have the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, and they have a sort of relationship, a sort of cross-pollination going on. The CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, of course, prosecutes people for crimes, for criminal acts. And that includes prosecuting people for things that would fall under the Obscene Publications Act 1959 and the Extreme Pornography Act 2008. But more significantly, they define obscenity. Now, ultimately, in a court of law, it would be for a jury to decide, but the Crown Prosecution Service has to issue guidance to its prosecutors as to what they believe a jury is likely to regard as obscene. And so what happened is they ended up creating a list, which I will read out to you in a minute. But that list is kind of important because the British Board of Film Classification is in charge of classifying videos and various other things within the United Kingdom, movies, and things like that. And as a result of that, they have what's called a restricted 18, an R18 category. And the R18 category is bound effectively by what the CPS defines as obscene. So if the CPS says we think these acts will be classed as obscene, the BBFC excludes them from those publications. And in an attempt at some kind of UK harmonisation, about 4 years ago, they also applied that classification to UK porn producers and distributors online. So if you host a porn website in the UK, then you will be subject to these same restrictions. Or if you host a porn website abroad, but it's hosting material that was produced in the UK, they will still be subject to those same restrictions. So that has created a kind of UK harmonisation, but it's set UK at odds with everything else, so that I could watch a porn site from the United States or from Europe or from anywhere else that will show acts that I couldn't see a UK porn producer producing. I know, it's complicated. So I think what I should do at this point is to go through this list of acts. Bear in mind, this is a list that the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, produced of acts that they believed would be classified as obscene by a jury under the Obscene Publications Act, but has then been adopted by the British Board of Film Classification and effectively used as a list of banned acts within UK pornography. So this is what we've got, and I've always found the first three particularly amusing given the context: spanking, caning and aggressive whipping. Of course, the context being in the same way as euphemistically anal sex is sometimes referred to as Greek sex or Greek, these acts are sometimes referred to as English in certain circles. Then it goes on: penetration by any object associated with violence, physical or verbal abuse, regardless of if consensual, urolagnia, and that's water sports or golden showers for the uninitiated. This was a word before this list. This list had people reaching for its dictionaries when it came out, because it only seems to be the CPS and the BBFC who use that word. Role-playing as non-adults, physical restraint, humiliation, female ejaculation, strangulation, face-sitting and fisting. And this brings me to my first bone of contention with Sargon of Akkad's video before I move on. And this isn't a factual issue, but it's something that I want to criticise him for, because I don't like to see this kind of cynical manipulation, misusing things that are done for one purpose and claiming that actually it was sexist. And Sargon played the same game that I've seen many, many times, especially when this list first came out, of portraying their banning of female ejaculation as sexist. Oh, you'll show male ejaculation but not female ejaculation. Let me tell you, if 99% of the cum shots that were shown on porn were actually men just pissing all over people, right, urinating all over the place, then they would have banned it, but they're not. It is male ejaculation. But I'm afraid, and let me show you on screen, you can read it out in their words, but we knew about this long before they explained it. That is the case with female ejaculation in porn, that it's just a cynical attempt by porn producers to show women pissing on one another, on themselves, on men, on whoever, right? And you can see that if you go on Pornhub. This is an issue that largely concerns the United States and the United Kingdom, where this is an issue. As the BBFC says itself, some of these videos that were brought to them that are described as showing female ejaculation, the same material is sold in mainland Europe, where water sports are not banned, and they are described as water sports. They are described as women pissing, not ejaculating. And that is the problem. It was being used as a cynical cover to be able to show women pissing, quite frankly, the vast majority of the time. So I think you can understand that. Now, let me make this clear. I'm not saying I think that material should be banned. Of course I don't. I don't think any of the things on this list should be banned. But if you're going to ban water sports and female ejaculation is being used as a cover 99% of the time just to show water sports, then you can understand why that would be banned. So now to move on from that list, and I'll be returning. You'll see how it all integrates a little bit later in the video, how these two things kind of mesh together. But moving on from that list, we then have this separate sphere of the age identification requirement, which is going to come live in the UK sometime in April, and nobody seemingly has any idea how this is going to function. We know the basics, we know what the requirements are. The BBFC have said that websites that fall under these requirements will be required to have a landing page for UK customers that has no pornographic content on it, and then to progress past that landing page, a process of robust age verification will have to be gone through. But they're not providing the robust age verification. It's going to fall to outside providers to do so, which is a danger. Sargon of Akkad made the point, well, it won't apply to me because I don't pay for porn. Who pays for porn anymore? And this only applies to paid porn sites. I'm afraid, Carl, you've got that absolutely and totally wrong. Wrong. It applies to all porn sites. Any website where a third of the content or over is of a pornographic nature will be required to have this scheme. Now, immediately there's one of the issues. What on earth does a third of the content mean? Does it mean by the number of megabytes hosted on your servers? Does it mean by the number of posts? Or the number of of people that are posting the content. A third of the people that are posting the content post pornographic content. Nobody has any idea. I don't think the BBFC have any idea. I think really the government's idea was, well, we want to include all porn sites, but we don't want to include things like Twitter, for example, which have a lot of porn on them, but a substantially larger amount of non-pornographic material. We don't expect everybody to be over 18 to use Twitter. So we want a system which will have the Twitters and the Facebooks and anything else to one side, and they won't have this requirement, but we'll have the porn sites to the other. But then you have lots of sites in the middle. A site like 4chan, which has a lot of porn on it, but it has a lot of non-porn. Where's that going to fall? Is that going to be proscribed by the BBFC unless they have this kind of age verification system? Nobody really knows, and nobody really knows what's going to happen next month because most of these schemes aren't properly up and running. Nobody knows which websites are subscribing to which schemes. The BBFC aren't running their own scheme. What they're saying is, no, other people will have to provide the schemes. So in one way or another, you will be expected to pass your details across to some of these other providers. Some of them might be smaller providers. Some of them might be the site taking your details themselves. And who is going to want to do that? And then you have the situation with MindGeek, which is probably the biggest name in pornography. They own RedTube, Pornhub, Brazzers, and a great deal more besides. They are running a scheme called Age ID. Now, on the one upside, I suppose, is that they are a company, despite having a disreputable past, it has to be said, for one reason or another. They are a large enough company that presumably they will be able to handle your data responsibly and have some degree of being held to account for what they do. But at the same time, that will create a massive repository of data, which leads to the possibility of blackmailing for people like MPs or anybody of any power who wants to look at porn. And why shouldn't they? They will have to pass their details over to a company like MindGeek, and if that data gets stolen, then there's the potential for blackmail over things like that. But it's very important to note that possibly the largest provider of this scheme will be the Age ID scheme, which is owned by MindGeek, which includes Pornhub and RedTube. You will see why that is important in a minute. But on the bigger scheme of things, we have no idea how many schemes, how they're going to apply. I predict a giant mess, a gigantic mess. I predict that sometime in April this scheme will come into effect. At that point, the BBFC will not have required the ISPs to have blocked sites. Whether the BBFC starts prescribing sites for the ISPs or leaves it to the ISPs themselves, I don't know. How quickly they get on board with that, I don't know. How quickly the websites get on board with that, I don't know. What I suggest is what Sargon suggests and what everybody suggests, which will be a proliferation of people using VPNs, especially amongst children who are the most tech savvy and will quickly learn in the playground, in the schoolyard, that the way to keep accessing the porn they wanted to see was via VPNs. The whole system is an absolute mess, as you can see. I hope that gives you a bit of an idea how you can get to a situation where you're within a month of a scheme going live. I suppose that's the nature of, because it's about porn, the politicians and everybody don't really want to discuss it, so it's just been kind of left to fester and not been properly managed, and I think it's just going to be hopeless. And it goes beyond. You can understand why Sargon was making a big issue, because it goes beyond porn, of course, because we're getting into a situation where the government is censoring the internet and saying you're going to have to pass your personal details so that we can find out who you are if you want to view certain things on the internet. And in many ways that is the thin end of the wedge, potentially. Where is that going to go next? What will be the next facet of material that you're not allowed to view online until you start releasing the details of who you are? But it's not all doom and gloom, ladies and gentlemen, not by any stretch of the imagination, hence the smile that is on my face. And this was actually one of the objections that I had to Sargon of Akkad's video, which is he didn't portray this part accurately at all. Whether it's because he wanted to just portray it in the worst possible light as opposed to portraying it in an accurate and balanced manner, that is my suspicion. But what he did not say, he showed you that list of banned acts, didn't he, that the CPS had created, that the BBFC was using. But what he didn't tell you is that the CPS, drum roll please, abandoned the entire list at the end of January this year. They set out a new set of guidance to their prosecutors saying that list is no more. And not only is it no more, but the new set of guidelines are quite clear that that kind of material is absolutely acceptable. And duly the BBFC have taken that on board and said, okay, that will now be fine for UK porn producers. Wow, what a massive instantaneous change of heart. Well, not exactly an instantaneous change of heart. The CPS started a consultation back in June, July 2018, where they proposed their new guidance regime. And as a result of that and the feedback came up with this new guidance. And that is how they're justifying it in terms of what their role ought to be and what people would find obscene. But really, why did they do that, right? What was the driving force that caused them to do that they don't outline? But I think there's some breadcrumbs. We can follow a little bit of a breadcrumb trail here. Think about the BBFC and what their new role is. Previously, their role was to look at UK porn, tapes, DVDs, things like that, and then online UK porn that's produced in the UK or distributed on servers held in the UK. They could ignore everything else, right? It didn't matter that material that contravened that exists on all these foreign websites. That's fine. It's outside of their jurisdiction. It's not part of their remit, but suddenly it's part of their remit. And what they're being tasked to do is to effectively oversee all these other sites and make sure that they are doing what they need to do in terms of the verification, okay? But the problem is that a large number of these sites include material which would fall foul of that list. So effectively now, sites that would come under their remit are including material which is proscribed by the BBFC under any other circumstances. You can see the issue, and you can particularly see the issue. I made a point of letting you know that MindGeek, who will be running the Age ID scheme, which will probably be the biggest verification scheme, runs RedTube, Pornhub and Brazzers, etc. I can tell you, because I've checked, all three of those sites would fall foul on quite a number of the things that are on that list. Okay, so that puts a bit of a perspective on it, and you can well imagine that companies like MindGeek, who will be running these things, going to the BBFC and saying, you're going to have to get your house in order here. Effectively, what you are doing is you're going to be asking us to run an ID scheme, which we will be happy to do, but our sites are going to potentially have to be banned by the BBFC because they have material that contravenes it. We're not prepared to run these schemes if that's going to be the circumstance. You can understand the situation now. So I believe that actually, in this case, rather than the CPS pulling the strings and the BBFC responding, that the situation's been reversed and the BBFC has gone to the CPS and said there needs to be some kind of resolution here. We need to harmonise what we do in terms of what the rest of the sensible world is doing, quite honestly. And so the CPS has ended up doing what it should have done a long time ago. What I want to do at this point, let me read you out what was on the Melon Farmers website. The Melon Farmers sounds an odd website, but if you're interested in censorship in the United Kingdom, the Melon Farmers site is the place to go. Whether it's to do with porn or violence or political censorship or whatever, they are a great website. Let me read you out because this sets out a lot of what is involved here. This was on a blog piece on the Melon Farmers site, 1st of February 2019. Okay, here we go. The upcoming UK internet porn censorship regime being introduced later this year has set the UK authorities to thinking about a more rational set of laws governing what porn is legal and what porn is illegal in the UK. It makes a lot of sense to get the UK stall straight before the commencement of the new censorship regime. It means the age verification scheme there. The most contradictory area of porn law is that often referred to as beyond R18 porn. This includes material historically banned by the Crown Prosecution Service, claiming obscenity, i.e. fisting, golden showers, BDSM, female ejaculation. Famously, from a recent anti-censorship campaign, face-sitting / breath play. Such material is currently cut from R18s as censored and approved by the BBFC. When the age verification law first came before Parliament, beyond R18 porn was set to be banned outright. However, as some of these categories are commonplace in worldwide porn, then the BBFC would have had to block practically all the porn websites in the world, leaving hardly any that stuck to R18 guidelines that would be acceptable for viewing after age verification. So the lawmakers dropped the prohibition, and this beyond R18 material will now be acceptable for viewing after age verification. This leaves the rather clear contradiction that the likes of fisting and female ejaculation would be banned or cut by the BBFC for sale in UK sex shops, but would be allowed by the BBFC for viewing online. This contradiction has now been squared by the government deciding that beyond R18 pornography is now legal for sale in the UK. So the BBFC will now have a unified set of rules specified by the CPS covering both the censorship of porn sales in the UK and the blocking of foreign websites. Next bit's interesting though. However, there is still one genre of pornography that is sticking out of line, and that is cartoon porn featuring underage characters. Such porn is widespread in anime but strictly banned under UK law. So given the large amounts of Japanese hentai porn on the most popular tube sites in the world, then those videos could still be an issue for the viability of the age classification regime and could still end up with a major porn site in the world banned. Just let me interject here and say I do not think that will happen. Already on sites like Pornhub, they have a system where they can see where your IP address is situated and block you from watching certain videos or materials that have certain tags within them. And now I think that we've got down to a more limited scope of just this one category. It would not surprise me if those sites block those particular kinds of materials from UK IPs and ISPs. I think that's probably what will happen. Okay, this is interesting. The new CPS censorship rules. The new rules have already come into force. They started on the 28th of January 2019. A CPS spokesman confirmed the change, saying, "It is not for the CPS to decide what is considered good taste or objectionable. We do not propose to bring charges based on material that depicts consensual and legal activity between adults where no serious harm is caused and the likely audience is over the age of 18. The CPS will, however, continue to robustly apply to law to anything that crosses the line into criminal conduct and serious harm." And then the Melon Farmers blog rightly made the following point. "It seems a little bit rich for the CPS to claim that it is not for the CPS to decide what is considered good taste or objectionable when they have happily been doing that for the last 30 years." So that gives you a little bit of a context. Now, as I say, there was this consultation that took place back last year in June, July. This was one of the questions that was asked, and I think this is really interesting because this is effectively seeing what the public response would be to abandoning these categories. This was the question: do consultees agree or disagree with the guidance? And this bit sets up, it's almost setting, they're almost wanting people to say, no, this material's okay, right? You can see what the CPS are driving for here. It's a little bit of a loaded question, I think. Do consultees agree or disagree with the guidance that prosecutors must exercise real caution when dealing with the moral nature of acts not criminalised by law, and that the showing or realistic depiction of sexual activity / pornography which does not constitute acts or conduct contrary to the criminal law is unlikely to be obscene, right? So it's a real loaded question there. They're really pushing you in the direction they want, which is to get rid of these categories. Then they put the following conduct, notwithstanding previous guidelines indicating otherwise, will not likely fall to be prosecuted under the Act. And then they've listed fisting, activities involving bodily substances, including urine, vomit, blood and faeces, infliction of pain / torture, bondage / restraint, placing objects into the urethra, any other sexual activity not prohibited by law, provided that it is consensual, no serious harm is caused, it is not otherwise inextricably linked with other criminality, and the likely audience is not under 18 or otherwise vulnerable. So I think the whole way they frame that, they're saying surely if something isn't criminal we shouldn't be categorizing it. Then they've given you the list of things they want to say, yeah, that's okay, and then after that they've said, look, we're still going to have these other things in place. So I think that question and the way that it was phrased showed that the CPS wanted to get rid of this list, right? They didn't just want to give a sort of open question and see what people said. This is what has resulted from this. The CPS has already updated its rules in revised legal guidance from cps.gov.uk. The key rules are now, okay, this is the situation as it is now. This is what has replaced that list. When considering whether the content of an article is obscene, prosecutors should distinguish between, on the first hand, content relating to criminal conduct, whether non-consensual activity or consensual activity, where serious harm is caused or otherwise inextricably linked to criminality, which is likely to be seen, and content relating to other non-criminal conduct, which is unlikely to be obscene, provided the audience is not young or otherwise vulnerable. This is the key bit here. Conduct will not likely fall to be prosecuted under the Act, provided that, and I think this is an entirely reasonable list. Let me just give you my perspective on it. The first criteria, it is consensual, focusing on full and freely exercised consent, and also whether provision of consent is made clear, where such consent may not be easily determined from the material itself. So certainly in terms of BDSM material, if somebody's gagged for the whole video, then it maybe you'd need a little precursor piece where the actor is talking to camera and explaining that they were all on board with everything that went on. The second one, no serious harm is caused. Not just harm, serious harm is caused. Then in brackets, whether physical or other, and applying the guidance above at paragraph 17. Now the guidance is, and this is quite critical, harm must have a likelihood and not just a possibility. So this is where the situation has moved on from things such as fisting before, which was on the list, and they were saying that there was a possibility for harm. Well, in any sexual act, in fact, there's a possibility for harm, but now they're saying that there has to be a very real likelihood that that act will lead to harm, almost an expectation that that is a dangerous act. The third point, it is not otherwise inextricably linked with other criminality, then in brackets, so as to encourage emulation or fueling interest or normalization of criminality. And the fourth point, the likely audience is not under 18 or otherwise vulnerable. Okay. Note that extreme pornography is still considered illegal, so will likely be considered obscene too, but the CPS adds a few additional notes of harmful porn that will continue to be illegal. Publications which show or depict the infliction of serious harm may be considered to be obscene publications because they show criminal assault, notwithstanding the consent of the victim. This includes dismemberment and graphic mutilation. I'm pleased they included that bit because that gives you an idea of the scale of things that they're talking about. It includes asphyxiation causing unconsciousness, which is more than transient and trifling, and given its danger is serious. Okay, so that gives you an idea of where that and just how much ground has been conceded, just what a shift has taken place. And duly the BBFC has responded to this in a positive manner. Let me read you this out. The BBFC has informed BBC News that it will indeed use the updated CPS guidelines when censoring porn. The BBFC explains, the BBFC's guidelines forbid material judged to be obscene under the current interpretation of the Obscene Publications Act. A spokeswoman told the BBFC, because the Obscene Publications Act does not define what types of material are likely to be considered obscene, we rely upon guidance from the Crown Prosecution Service as to what classes of material they consider likely to be suitable for prosecution. We are aware that the CPS have updated their guidance on obscene publications today, and we have now adjusted our own internal policies to reflect that revised guidance. So that's what Melon Farmers had to say with regard to that. And I have to say a pretty good summation. Having read the new CPS guidance, having read the study that the CPS put out June, July last year and the responses that they received from that. I'll link you both documents in the footnote. I think that's a pretty good summary. What do I think to the new position? It takes my breath away. It's such a huge change, not just in terms of what they are proscribing, but the methodology they're using. They're going from a very prescriptive list of things which will be covered, outlining specific acts, doing away with that model entirely, and instead going through to a set of guidelines, which is the method that they would more usually use in other circumstances. And I welcome both the approach but also the guidelines that they've chosen. I think they are very well thought through. I think they are probably at about the right level, and I think they've also anticipated some of the issues as to where those guidelines could then be over-applied to reincorporate or still provide some ambiguity over some of those old categories of material. And they've made it quite clear, no, those things will be fine, right? Those are not the things that we're going for anymore. So they get a big thumbs up with regard to that. And so overall, we have this situation where we have this new scheme coming in, this age verification ID scheme, which I'm not really in favour of, because I don't think it's going to do what it says on the tin, and I think it's an absolute mess. We're a month out from it coming in, and it's an absolute mess. Nobody seems to know exactly what's going to happen, including the BBFC, who are the people that are in charge of it. And yet it's still going to happen. On the one hand, we have this absolute mess, but on the other hand, we have this huge change of heart which goes in the other direction. If you'd offered me that as a package and said, do I think that that is a step in the right direction, I'd have said, well, I don't really like that package deal, right? I'd rather have it as two separate things. But if you're offering me as a package deal, on balance, I take it. It's an improvement, because the good part of it is clearly good, both in terms of application but also in terms of the thought behind it. The age verification thing is crap in terms of application, and it won't work, but at least I understand the motivations. It's to protect the children, which, even if it isn't going to work, I have no objection at least to the motivations. And at least it's trying to separate off adults from children, rather than just saying, right, blanket ban. Children might say this, so just have a blanket ban so that nobody can see it. So those are all positives, massive positives as I see it, absolute huge changes of heart, and positives which weren't even discussed in Sargon of Akkad's analysis. He just pretended sort of those things hadn't even happened, and I think that made his video somewhat lacking. It made his video biased and one-sided in that regard. As I say, on balance, on that narrow perspective of just looking at it in terms of pornography, I take that change. That seems to be a positive change for the United Kingdom. From a wider perspective, the situation is a little bit more messy. One thing that it is highlighted is when it comes to fields such as this, that effectively our parliament is found lacking, our government is found lacking, because the whole way that these things have been debated is in a way that people, even MPs that would like to stick up for this kind of material, don't really feel enabled to do so. It's only something which will lose them votes. It will never gain you votes, and that's a little bit of a problem from the outset. I think it is good to see that the CPS and the BBFC have been prepared to reflect changes in societal and cultural attitudes, are prepared to respect adult autonomy, at least in this individual sphere. But there are these very real concerns, and these very real concerns extend beyond just this particular example, because now we have in place an ID scheme for UK citizens for the internet, where for effectively the first time you will be putting your individual data, not just your IP address, but your individual data, and say it is me that is viewing this material. And the arguments are, well, it's to protect the children. What about extreme political opinions or unpopular political opinions? There are people who will argue that children need protecting from these things. So it's not inconceivable that people will start making the argument that these IDs need to be used for political opinions as well. You're getting into quite scary territory now, where you can start to be monitored for the political material you are looking at. We're going to have to, as a population, be very careful to make sure that this doesn't drift into other things. The safety of the data, as I said to you, is a concern. Even if the likes of MindGeek are acting in above board capacity, there's still the danger of data leaks, and especially for people who are in the public eye, the policy makers who could be blackmailed for the things that they have been looking at. And last but not least, for me, there is a concern over VPNs, which is that we know that governments already have some concerns over VPNs because it is stopping them regulating the material you're looking at. If they realise that people are circumventing this by using VPNs, most notably children will be circumventing this from using VPNs, that gives them a cause of justification for start going after VPNs. And once they start going after VPNs, then that affects all the other uses, the legitimate uses that you could be using a virtual private network for. It would be seriously embarrassing for me if the UK ended up being, I think, probably the second country or the third country, I think, after China and Vietnam to ban the use of VPNs. Okay, maybe that's somewhere down the line, but these are the wider concerns that we would have. Interested to know what you think about this, both the wider issues, both the general issues, and also the situation with regard to porn in the UK, the good and the bad of these two very, very recent changes. Interested to know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this material, if you enjoy these videos generally, I like to make these videos of about 30 or 40 minutes that embellish and give you more detail that maybe you will not get otherwise. If you enjoy that and you enjoy my output, I'll leave you the links in the footnote if you'd care to support my material. That would be great. It keeps me doing what I do. Okay, enough said there. Thank you for watching this video, and bye.